When I was young, I used to think debt was mostly a math problem. You borrowed too much. You paid too much interest. You made the payments. You reduced the balance. Eventually, the thing disappeared. That is the clean version. Real life is not that clean. Debt is never only math. Debt is emotion, habit, fear, avoidance, shame, hope, identity, and timing, all wrapped around a number that keeps asking for your attention every month. That is why so many people stay in debt longer than they should. It is not always because they are lazy. It is not always because they are irresponsible. Often it is because they keep trying to solve a behavioral and emotional problem with arithmetic alone. Arithmetic matters. But arithmetic without structure is weak, and structure without a reason to endure it usually does not last. That is where I would begin. If a person came to me and said, "I am tired of debt. I do not want another motivational speech. I do not want another video telling me to grind harder. I do not want another recycled lecture about how I should never have borrowed in the first place. I want out. I want to breathe. I want to know what actually works." I would tell him something very plain. The way out of debt is not mystery, but it does require honesty, order, and repetition. I know the internet likes flashy promises. Pay off everything in 30 days. Destroy your debt in one bold move. Use this one secret loophole. Make one giant sacrifice and change your life overnight. I do not respect that kind of talk. Most people did not get into debt through one dramatic weekend. They got there through a series of ordinary choices, ordinary delays, ordinary emergencies, and ordinary acts of drift. The way out is usually built the same way, through clear decisions repeated long enough that the balance finally has no place left to hide. If I had to reduce the entire thing to one line, I would say this: debt loses power when your system becomes stronger than your denial. That is the real battle. Because denial is what keeps debt large, even while the borrower insists he is working on it. Denial says, "I roughly know what I owe." Denial says, "It is not as bad as it looks." Denial says, "I will get serious next month." Denial says, "I need one more comfort purchase because this week was difficult." Denial says, "I deserve to feel better now and I can fix the numbers later." Denial says, "I know the debt is there, but I do not need to stare at it directly. I have no patience for that." You cannot defeat what you refuse to name. So if I were rebuilding a life weighed down by debt, the first thing I would do is something people hate and then later feel relieved they finally did. I would get organized so completely that the facts become undeniable. Every debt, every balance, every interest rate, every minimum payment, every due date, not in my head, not roughly, not emotionally, in one place. I would want the entire enemy visible. People often delay this step because they are afraid the truth will feel worse than the fog. They imagine that if they see the full number, they will collapse under the shame of it. The opposite is usually true. The fog is what creates helplessness. Once the balances are laid out in front of you, the problem becomes solid. Ugly, maybe. Embarrassing, maybe. But solid. A solid problem can be attacked. Fog only hangs around your life, making you feel small. That is why I would take a date with myself to get intimate with the numbers. No phone, no distractions, no half-looking. I would gather the statements, the online balances, the notices, the loan accounts, the cards, every one of them. I would write them down and force them into one picture. This is not financial therapy. This is reconnaissance. And reconnaissance matters. A general who refuses to study the battlefield is not brave. He is doomed. A household that refuses to study its debts is not preserving peace. It is preserving weakness. I would rather feel discomfort for an evening than carry confusion for 3 more years. Once that list exists, the second question becomes obvious. What is the order of attack? Now here is where people want a perfect answer, because people always want the perfect method to rescue them from the harder work of sticking to any method. They ask whether they should use the avalanche or the snowball, whether math or psychology matters more, whether one method is smarter, whether the other one is more motivating. I do not think this debate is unimportant. I simply think people exaggerate its importance relative to what really matters. The avalanche method says attack the highest interest rate first. The snowball method says attack the smallest balance first. The avalanche is mathematically elegant. The snowball is psychologically elegant. I admire elegance of both kinds. If you are purely logical, the avalanche preserves more money because it reduces interest drag faster. If you know yourself well and know you are the kind of person who needs visible wins to stay engaged, the snowball can be wiser because momentum is worth something too. We are not robots. People do not live inside formulas. They live inside moods, fatigue, temptation, pride, embarrassment, and all sorts of private weather. I have always believed the best debt method is the one that survives contact with your real psychology. That said, I understand why the snowball often works so well for ordinary people. A quick win is not a small thing. It creates evidence. It tells the brain this is not endless. It turns the idea of debt freedom into something concrete. One account disappears. Then another. The monthly burden begins to shift. The freed minimum payments start rolling downhill into the next target. Momentum matters because behavior matters, and behavior is what gets people free. So if I were doing this for most ordinary people, I would likely line the debts up from smallest balance to largest balance, keep the minimums going everywhere, and throw every extra dollar at the smallest balance until it dies. Then I would take its payment and its former minimum and roll them into the next debt, then the next and the next. Not because this is mathematically pure, because once the machine starts moving, human beings are less likely to sabotage it. This is the part people misunderstand about debt. They think the real problem is the number. Often the deeper problem is that the number has no system pressing against it. A balance without a system feels permanent. A balance inside a system starts to feel mortal. That is a very different emotional experience. Now, before I got aggressive, I would insist on one thing that many impatient people try to skip. A small emergency reserve, not a massive one at first. Not enough to delay forever, but enough that the next flat tire, medical bill, or broken appliance does not send you right back to the credit card you are supposedly trying to kill. Life has a way of interrupting every financial plan. Eventually, the person with zero buffer treats every interruption as proof that debt freedom is impossible. The person with even a modest reserve experiences the same interruption and says, "Unpleasant, yes, but not fatal." That difference matters more than it sounds. $1,000 is not wealth, but it can be dignity. It can be the line between using cash and using panic. It can be the line between a setback and a reset. It can be the line between progress continuing and progress being laughed off the table by one ugly Tuesday. I respect small cash reserves because they protect the plan from life. A good plan should survive ordinary bad luck. If it cannot, it is not yet a good plan. Once the debt list exists, once the order of attack is clear, once the first small emergency fund is in place, then the next question becomes the most important practical question in the entire process. How much room do I actually have every month? This is where people start getting religious in the wrong direction. They say they want to be debt-free, but they never calculate the exact dollars that can be aimed at the target. They rely on vague good intentions. They promise to cut back. They say they will be more disciplined. They hope next month will somehow reveal a surplus that previous months never produced. Hope is not a strategy. A surplus is, if you do not know the difference between what comes in and what goes out, then you do not know what weapon you are bringing into the fight. I would want that number with no romance around it. Net monthly income, actual monthly expenses, the difference, and not guessed measured. I would use the most recent full month and pull every transaction. Rent, groceries, eating out, gas, shopping, subscriptions, transportation, insurance, entertainment, cash leakage, all of it. I want the real life, not the self. Flattering version of the life, the budget in your head is nearly always kinder than the one living in your statements. Then I would compare what I say matters with what my spending proves matters. That is a sobering exercise. A person says he desperately wants debt freedom, but his statements say he wants convenience, comfort, little treats, restaurant meals, small escapes, and one more week of pretending it is all manageable. Again, I am not against comfort. I am against lies. If debt freedom is the goal, then money must start moving like that goal is real. That means lifestyle changes. Temporary ones if you are wise, specific ones. If you are serious, no, you probably cannot maintain the exact same level of leisure spending, shopping habits, casual dining, trip planning, and emotional spending while paying off debt at speed. No, this does not mean your life is over. It means you are making a temporary trade. Short-term vanity and comfort are being exchanged for long-term freedom. That is a very good trade. One of the worst habits people carry into debt payoff is trying to act as if the process should feel seamless. They want to pay off debt but also preserve every behavior that helped create it. They want intensity without discomfort. Life rarely offers that bargain. If your system is going to change, your daily choices will have to change with it. Meal prep instead of eating out, fewer casual purchases, no pretending that small wants are invisible, no vacation just because you feel you deserve one for enduring the stress of the debt you are still financing, no luxury items while your future is still being charged interest. That may sound harsh. I think it is merciful, because every month you keep living the same expensive script while claiming to want freedom. You are really choosing the debt again. I prefer honesty. Now here is the part that separates disciplined people from merely interested people. Tracking people think the plan is the hard part. The plan is not the hard part. The hard part is continuing to tell the truth after the plan exists. The first month of discipline can be fueled by excitement, the second by guilt, the third by irritation. After that, what remains is structure or drift. That is why I would track every month. Income, expenses, savings rate, debt payments, updated balances. I would want to see progress, not imagine it. Visual proof matters. We are creatures of evidence. A sticky note, a chart, a progress bar, a tracker on the refrigerator, a note on the phone background, something that reminds you daily that there is a real war being fought and that each month can either weaken the enemy or feed it. Some people think this is childish. I think it is practical. If seeing the number makes you subconsciously say no to the restaurant, good. If a visible tracker makes you skip the impulse order, good. If the reminder of your goal changes a tiny behavior 3 times a week, then over a year it has paid for itself many times over. The mind needs cues, use them. I would also return again and again to the reason why. Not because I love motivational language, but because human beings endure deprivation better when the deprivation is attached to something meaningful. A person who merely hates debt may not last. A person who wants peace of mind, wants a future home, wants to stop waking up with dread at the start of the month, wants to build a life where the money earned belongs more to the future than to old obligations, that person has a stronger engine, my own. Why would never be the applause of saying, I paid off debt. It would be freedom, silence, the absence of that monthly nagging pressure, the clean space that opens up when no creditor is leaning over your shoulder. That is what I would keep in view. I have learned something over the years that people do not say often enough. Debt is not only a financial burden, it is a cognitive burden. It sits in the mind. It taxes sleep. It reduces the feeling of ownership over your own work, because each month, some portion of what you earn has already been promised away. To wake up without that pressure is worth more than many people realize. Now, if after budgeting honestly you discover there is no real savings rate, no meaningful room, no actual surplus left even after a hard look, then the answer is not to cry in the shower and declare yourself broken. The answer is to tell the truth. You do not just have a spending problem, you have an income problem too. At that point, the plan becomes two-handed, cut harder where you can, earn more where you must. I have never believed you can frugal your way out of every hole. Frugality matters, discipline matters. But when the gap is too small, then income becomes one of the major levers. More hours, side work, a better role, selling something, freelancing, temporary second job, skill improvement. There is no romance in this. It is simply arithmetic meeting reality. If the hole is deep enough, the rope probably needs both ends pulling. This is especially true for people who tell themselves a dangerous half-truth. Once I make more money, then I will handle the debt. Very often what happens instead is that more money arrives and gets absorbed by a more expensive life, because no structure was built first. That is why if the system is not disciplined when money is tight, it often does not magically become disciplined when money is less tight. Money amplifies habits. It rarely cures them. So the beauty of the debt payoff period is that it can teach discipline in a way that later wealth building benefits from immensely. A person who learns to budget, track, redirect cash flow, automate good behavior, and live below his means while fighting debt is learning muscles that will make saving and investing much easier later. Debt freedom is not the end of the lesson. It is the beginning of a more useful one. That is why I would never waste the struggle. I would use the struggle to become the kind of person who knows exactly how money behaves in his life, who can say no, who can delay gratification without drama, who can separate wants from goals, who can direct dollars where they matter rather than where they merely soothe. That sort of person is dangerous in the best possible way. Once he is debt-free, he is no longer making payments to the past. He is finally able to start funding the future with the same intensity. And that is when things get very interesting, because one of the quiet truths about debt payoff is this. The day the debt dies, the machine does not have to die with it. The payments you are making do not need to dissolve into lifestyle drift. The habits you built do not need to disappear just because the pressure is gone. That is where ordinary people either become financially strong or stay ordinary forever. They say, I earned this relief, and they let all the freed cash flow wander, or they say, now this money works for me instead of against me. I prefer the second sentence. You paid off the credit card. Good. Now fund the emergency reserve properly. You killed the personal line of credit. Good. Now build the investing machine. You finished the student loan. Good. Now the monthly payment becomes retirement funding or a house fund or a broad index fund contribution. That is how struggle becomes compounding. The person who learned nothing from debt freedom will need another lesson soon. The person who learned structure from debt freedom may have changed the entire direction of his life. That is why I do not think of debt payoff as a punishment season. I think of it as character under pressure, a proving ground, a test of whether a person can align his daily behavior with a long-term goal that does not flatter him immediately. That matters, because all serious wealth building is some version of that. Saving is that. Investing is that. Ignoring noise is that. Refusing lifestyle creep is that. Building a business carefully is that. Holding through volatility is that. Debt payoff simply introduces the lesson in a more painful language. And if you can learn it there, you can use it everywhere else. So if I were to summarize the entire thing, I would say it like this. First, face the reality completely. Every balance, every rate, every due date, no fog. Second, choose a method of attack you will actually sustain. Snowball if momentum keeps you alive. Avalanche if math motivates you more. Just choose and begin. Third, build a small emergency buffer so life cannot reset the whole war with one surprise. Fourth, budget honestly enough to know your true savings rate. Then rework the spending so the goal is funded before the mood gets a vote. Fifth, track relentlessly enough that progress stays visible and drift stays uncomfortable. Sixth, if the surplus is too small, widen the income, not just the suffering. And finally, when the debt dies, keep the machine alive and point it toward the future instead of letting relief turn back into drift. That is the way out as I see it. Not glamorous, not magical, not built on one dramatic move, built on clarity, built on order, built on the refusal to keep financing the same pain once you finally understand how it works. There are few feelings more underrated than looking at a balance that used to own you and seeing zero. Not because zero is a beautiful number, because it means something else. It means the money you earn has finally stopped going to an old version of your life. It means the future is no longer being billed for decisions you already learned from. It means the month begins a little quieter. It means you can breathe. That is not a small thing. I would want anyone carrying debt to understand that freedom is real, not easy, not immediate, but real. And if you build the system correctly, if you keep your why close enough that it still has power, if you stop hiding from the truth and start directing dollars like a person who means it, The day will come when the debt is gone, and when it is, do not waste the lesson. Use it, because the habits that destroy debt can build wealth. The discipline that cleared the balance can fund the future. And the peace you wanted in the beginning can become much more than relief. It can become a life that is finally harder to corner. That is worth a great deal, far more, I think, than people understand when they are still standing at the beginning, looking up at the number and wondering if it can really be done. It can, but first you have to stop negotiating with the truth. Then you have to build the machine. Then you have to let the machine run long enough that the balance has nowhere left to live. That is how I would do it. That is what I would trust. And for most ordinary people, it is more than enough. There is one last point I would make because it is easy to miss once the numbers become the whole story. Debt changes the way a person sees himself. He may stop taking opportunities because he feels he is already carrying too much. He may stay in work that no longer fits because the payment due date is louder than his judgment. He may become more tolerant of disrespect because instability has reduced his sense of options. He may stop dreaming in practical ways because every dream immediately runs into the wall of what is owed. That is another reason I hate unnecessary debt. It narrows imagination. It taxes not just cash flow, but personality. And when I say I want people free of debt, I do not only mean I want their balances lower. I mean I want their future less pre-sold. I want their work to belong more to the coming years than to old mistakes. I want their decisions to become cleaner. I want their confidence to stop being interrupted by a monthly reminder that the past still has a claim on the present. That is why the fight matters. Not because debt makes you morally bad, not because paying it off makes you superior, but because every dollar that stops serving old obligations becomes available to serve something more useful. Peace, security, investment, opportunity, a better home, a move, a business, a reserve, a calmer marriage, a less frightened mind. That is what the zeros make room for. And I think if more people saw debt that way, they would stop trying to soothe themselves while it lingers and start building the system that actually ends it. Because the balance is not there to be emotionally managed. It is there to be defeated. That is the right word. Not admired, not normalized, not explained forever. Defeated 1 month at a time, one payment at a time, one denied impulse at a time, one tracked expense at a time, one quiet decision at a time. That is how people win. And winning, in this case, sounds very simple. It sounds like silence at the beginning of it sounds like no creditor waiting. It sounds like a paycheck that finally arrives with fewer instructions attached to it. It sounds like a person who can begin building instead of merely recovering. That is the sound I would want. And if that is the sound you want too, then you already have enough reason to begin.